What's up, everybody? It is me, Ben, the producer. I am out in Michigan staying with Richard, but I forgot a tripod. I'm just here to quick say that in this episode, we have a lot of discussion of substances that are illegal in the U.S. And I just want to be clear, we are not endorsing you doing them. Don't you do it. And in this episode, like all of our episodes, we went in trying to listen and keep an open mind. So the boys do not challenge any specific medical claims made by our guest. So just don't use us as your only source on this issue, and reach out on the internet to learn more about it. There should be something at the end. Enjoy the show. That seems fine.
Welcome to the Spiritable Podcast. My name is Luke.
I'm Richard, and I just got my master's degree in divinity.
Everyone has a different perspective, so we're bringing on all sorts of people from different walks of life, like Jewish, Buddhist, Christian, atheist, and more, to discuss the biggest spiritual and moral questions and how they see it in their philosophy.
Our goal is to find where we agree and disagree, and hopefully challenge ourselves to be better people in the process.
Together, we shall dive deeper and get weirder.
Let's
2,
fart.
1. That's good.
Good to meet you.
Good
Yeah,
to meet
good
you.
to meet you too. Now it's rack, right?
That's correct.
Now, I will say that I loved your, when I Googled you, obviously, doing my research, I loved your LinkedIn profile banner. Your little synopsis about yourself was, Rack is an alchemical storyteller with his finger on the pulse of tomorrow and the heart of today. I was like, oh, what a good byline.
I hate
That's
long
good
bios.
stuff.
I have to know though, what does being an alchemical storyteller mean? In 3 sentences or less.
As plain English as you can be.
I think it means conveying spiritual truths or conveying truths which help transform a person. So we all have things within us, and I've had things within us, and I've gone through experiences, and those experiences have been transformative and led me to create a map, if you will, of either consciousness or reality. And in communicating that, the alchemical process, of course, is to transmute the lead to the gold, or to the base consciousness to the higher consciousness.
Is there a difference between a story and just sort of a conversation? Like, a storyteller has a sort of like fantastical imagery to it that I really enjoy. Like, I love reading stories. I love telling stories. Is there a difference there besides that and just a vehicle to convey truth?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know what they say, there's all these different gradations of information. So there's maybe just data or information, and then there might be pattern within that, and then there might be meaning. That might become, there's a level of data, information, wisdom. And so it's a matter of harnessing all of that and making sense of it. And so you might know how to bake a cake, but I mean, okay, that's great. But I mean, what do you do with it? I mean, it's the information which counts, and the information which we need at this time, in this time of disinformation and frankly weaponized information, that, storytelling is a transformative act, and the stories we tell as a culture, what are true to us as a culture, defines our personality on a cultural level.
So then would you define any spiritual or religious leader, I guess, if they're doing their job, as an alchemical storyteller?
Maybe. I mean, yeah, I guess the thing is, when it comes down to leaders, there's so many, the meaning of words and what we take them of in the modern world have different meanings these days. So a leader in the West is really a public servant. But if you have spiritual or religious leaders like the Dalai Lama or someone like that, perhaps, yes, they're advancing deeper truths and they're trying to communicate that to their audiences. But I mean, it comes down to, what is leadership? I mean, where are we going? Where are we headed? What do we need? I mean, you know what they say? It's like, the ancient Chinese proverb curse, may you live in interesting times, but it's like, may you get the leaders you need, not the leaders you want, right? It's like, it's everything's commodified these days. So it's hard to say what the authentic sort of impulse of these archetypes are.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I actually, when you were describing being a storyteller, I I was struck with, just in my general life, I consider myself a storyteller. I very much communicate with people through stories and narratives. And my wife, Sonia, pointed out recently, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, is that when I have a story, I always introduce it with a title and then tell it. I'm like, oh, have you heard about the favorite plant I've ever owned? And then I tell a story, but like they all have titles.
That. You do kind of do that.
And I didn't realize that I did that. She's like, why do you give titles to all your stories? Like they're formal. But all of that tangent to say, as a pastor, I don't know if I consider my role as a pastor to be a storyteller. Because I think
you might not realize that, but you have to be to communicate. We're all storytellers. We're all telling stories, but some stories are more primal, more fundamental, and more necessary. You could say, like, I need milk, go get milk. It's a story, technically. Although you could break it down and say story has a beginning, middle, and end, and there's a difference in communication styles. But essentially, I think we're all storytellers, but we don't realize it anymore because language is a virus, and the medium that we're in has become invisibilized. And so we don't realize really the power of communication. And you know, it's crazy. I mean, if you strip this back, it's modulated vibrational telepathy. Here I am with a thought in my head, and I make this sound that then communicates, and now through technology onto the other side of the world, so you can understand at least a bit of what I'm saying. It's magic.
It is magical.
Yeah, I guess the distinction that I would make, and I think you're definitely right that everyone is a storyteller and they all have their own ways of telling stories. And I definitely do my job through storytelling, but I think my end goal is more to, and this will sound very philosophically floofy, I think, is to help other people find the story of them and the divine, right? Like my job isn't to tell them what the story of their spiritual path is. My job is to facilitate them learning that. And so like my story is a good tool for that, right? Because people connect with seeing their own stories in others and they reflect by seeing their own stories in others. But that's just a tool that I use for being kind of on the side, being like, you got it. Choose the next way to go with purpose.
Oh, spiritual cheerleader, sort of.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that's essentially what I do as well. It's just that I have had a lot of experiences and a lot of depth of the experiences. But yeah, I mean, it's not really about me. I don't want it to be about me. It's like, oh my God, there's this whole terrain, there's this geography on interdimensional levels, which, you know, all through history, all through time, indigenous cultures, like it's real, it exists, and we're remembering it. But it's to inspire and invoke people to take that first step themselves, right? It's not about glorifying the individual, because that's an egoic sort of Western cultural thing. It's really about a more tribal, network-centric approach where it's like everyone's on the hero's journey through their life. And there are certain beats to that which are archetypal, and I guess I want to help people embark on that journey.
I like that.
So where on the hero's journey does the Bufo Alvarius toad come in? Because this is the main reason we brought you in here today. Now, doing my research on your history, there's so much that you've been involved in, and I don't want to discredit that, but we do want to focus in on the Bufo Alvarius toad because it's a very niche and interesting topic that has a lot of importance in the community that you're involved in. So I'd love to hear from you how you got involved with the toad specifically, and also how then you came to a point where you were leading this World Bufo Alvarius Congress a couple years ago. And as a short introduction, we want to say that the Bufo Alvarius toad is found in the Sonora Desert and excretes 5-MeO-DMT, which is a psychedelic substance that is used as medicine for people to take a spiritual journey of healing. So that's a very brief synopsis of what the toad is about. But yeah, Rack, I wanted to turn it over to you to talk about your experience with this and how you came to find it and how you came to be in the place that you are.
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess I'll just backtrack very briefly into how I got to that point. So, you know, I guess I have always been countercultural, and I've worked in mainstream journalism and writing and editing. But about 15 years ago now, I was, freelancing for Australian Penthouse as a gonzo journalist, and I was writing about psychedelic culture and consciousness, and that got me into ayahuasca, and that got me into going to Peru, which then became a book and 2 books and a film. And, a week into my virgin experiences in Peru, interviewing the shamans of the Amazon, the curanderos, and drinking ayahuasca, I actually stumbled across a Western gringo called Ron Wheelock, who was working with 5-MeO DMT. And this was the synthetic version from the lab. And he was working with I call him a mad scientist on the frontiers of consciousness, who has since deceased.
That's another good You're good at titles. I can see why you were a journalist. You're
it's all
good
right.
at titles.
Dr. Juan Acosta, who was doing brainwave research, EEG, wet cap, 19-channel electroencephalography of people on the 5-MeO. And so I signed up for that. And that was probably the most significant experience of my life. It was very...
sorry, they were doing that right in Peru? Like,
yeah.
just in these, like...
Well, Ron had secured the synthetic variety from one of the Chinese labs. 5-MeO only became illegal in North America in 2011. This was back in 2006. And he was just doing it. I mean, it was still in I do stress that it is the most powerful substance we know of for the weight ratio in nature, and it's something to be approached with reverence, or if at least caution, at least some type of respect, because it can totally blow apart your whole ego structure. And, you've got to be very careful going into shamanic medicines to begin with. But basically, I first did that in 2005, and that's a whole chapter in what became the book Eye Awakenings. And then it became pretty much the cornerstone of the film, the documentary adaptation of the film Eye Awakenings, because we had a media team there. And the thing is, they were capturing what's happening on the outside, and the film took a lot of pains to try to recreate what was happening on the inside with a lot of visuals and narration guiding you through this emotional journey. But then it was completely ego-dissolvingly, obliteratingly powerful. And I didn't go near 5-MeO again for another 8 years or so.
Oh, wow.
Basically, a Mexican shaman or a Mexican practitioner. The shaman term is very loaded, and there's a lot of cultural conceits and dogma around. It's a Western term applied to indigenous people, and it can often be pretty loaded in terms of Westerners' ability to really hold space for people in shamanic journeying. But a Western practitioner from Mexico visited Australia in 2015, Octavio Rettig, and blew everyone's minds with Toad, myself included, and that was sort of initiation, a next level initiation, and that set in motion the next 5 years of my life, basically working with 5-MeO and Toad medicine and working with the community that was forming. So the interesting thing, in 2006, I had my first 5-MeO experience, and it was all encompassing. And I could talk about that a bit more if you want, but
I would love to hear more about that. Yeah, in as much detail as you're comfortable sharing, because that's a significant point for you.
We talked about this a bit earlier in the sense of, it's awkward. It's actually awkward in a sense to talk about entheogenic or psychedelic experiences, I find, because I don't want it necessarily to be about me. It's like, oh, there's Rakrazam banging on again about 5-MeO and immersion into the vibratory levels of the Godhead. I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, it's a funny thing we do, because these are incredibly sacred and profound and personal experiences. And yet I am choosing to attempt my best to communicate the essence of them to a wider audience, in the hope that my experiences can be a catalyst or a trigger for people to understand that there is more than this baseline reality, that there is more than the Western culture has led us to believe, and that indigenous communities all around the world who are caretakers of their medicines understand that it's about relationship, and it's about surrender, in a sense, to these greater forces that are out there. And so, the Eye Awakenings book has a motif that it uses, the Joseph Campbell hero's journey metaphor, for the structure of the 3 sort of sections of the book. And in Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, basically, you leave the known world behind. So step 1 is the departure from the known world. And you're leaving your comfort zone behind. You're leaving behind everything you know, and you're being vulnerable enough to put yourself into a new psychic terrain, a new territory. And that is where the initiation, the second stage, happens, where there is a contact experience with whatever that is. You know, in ayahuasca circles and culture, there's a dichotomy, I guess, between the medicalization and the mechanistic reductionist approach to what's happening. And they'll say, oh, well, you know, it's making more permeable the default mode network, and your subconscious is coming up into your unconscious, and you're having a visionary experience, but these could just be projections. And all of that may or may not be true. In an indigenous understanding and in many people's feeling of what these medicines do, they enable us to connect to a larger ecology, a geography on, let's say, other dimensional realms. But it's a felt experience in the human psyche. And there can be corroboration of this. There can be, you know, spaces within that other people can go to and say that they have gone to, or it can be very personal and very visionary. All of this is to say that there is, you know, a time-honored legacy and tradition of working with psychoactive substances with indigenous cultures, because they're from the earth and they understand the relationships, and they understand that we're part of this web of life, and the entire web of life is alive, intelligent in an animist understanding to the indigenous peoples. It's only Western culture that is atrophied and blocked off and compartmentalized down, and part and parcel of a lot of our diseases and mental issues is that we're not living sustainably, and we're not living in a soulful sort of way. We're really just trapped in our 9-to-5s. So I'm not drifting.
So if I can ask you a quick question, this is an interest to me. A lot of times in conversations around psychedelic spiritual experiences, and from what I've seen in some people's discussion of smoking 5-MeO, either synthetic or naturally, there's this idea of almost agency in the substance. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, that's where the medicine wanted to take you, or it had a plan for what that experience was going to be for you, kind of thing. So do you see it more in the realm of there is something with agency, some sort of metaphysical agency happening that is leading you somewhere? Or is it more there are barriers we've put up in the human mind that this substance allows us to break down to, from ourselves, see past?
So does the spiritual experience come from us or come from it? Is that sort of like the...
Yeah, well, I will get to Bufo and 5-MeO specifically, and I'll just, in that context, to lead up to that. So in the last decade, a lot of organizations like MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies in the States, and other organizations around the world have been doing legal studies with psychoactives, including 5-MeO. In general, psychoactives work on this regional cluster of the brain called the default mode network. It's like this aggregate channel of reality of all the incoming sensory data that we're getting, and it loosens it up so our consciousness, our sense of I, can go on a journey into that full spectrum of multidimensionality which all indigenous and spiritual cultures says exists out there. 5-MeO specifically is also working on the frontal and parietal lobes of the brain, and it's actually lowering that sense of I or ego, the egoic I, the identity I. So when a baby is born, it's like distributed, right? It's physically here, but it hasn't got a sense of ego and identity. It's just like, it's just so spacey. It's like it becomes a point of focus until it becomes the I, the I-ness, that point of focus, and then it starts to aggregate personality and build from there. So we're born with this filter mechanism called the ego, which is necessary, and it's not about ego death. It's really about the ego learning right relationship with the rest of our being. But in Western culture, for 12,000 years now, all of his story, we have basically had a journey of separation from the greater whole. And so this egoic concentration seems to be a trauma response in humanity. We know that 12,700, 800 years ago, we had the Lower Dryas extinction event, and humanity went into agriculture and went into basically civilization building. But it's at the expense of separating from nature and separating from this openness into a contraction and an egoic build up from there. So 5-MeO specifically is very, very powerfully able to reduce the ego. I mean, to lower the mind, to lower the veil, and to reveal what is beneath that. And so, you know, a lot of people feel that coming back to your question, this sense of agency or intelligence, is it in the 5-MeO experience? Well, what is the 5-MeO experience? All it really is you dropping the egoic mind to reveal what is in you. And as you do that, it's like, you know, the poet Rumi says, you were not the drop, you were the ocean in the drop. And yet we've learned to identify with this cohesion of personality that is separate from everything else. But it's just a mask. It's just an illusion. You can do this through meditation, through breath work, through tantra, through raising your vibration in any way. You can actually learn to take control of your multidimensional being and get beyond the cultural constraints of what the ego and what the culture reflects is normal for us. We're built to do this. We have this capability within us. So 5-MeO specifically is believed to be produced in the lungs and the cerebrospinal fluid. It's kept at bay by monoamine oxidase inhibitors in the gut, so we're not like tripping all the time. But all through history, mystics, holy people, saints, meditators, monks, people who actually direct their sensory input inwards as opposed to outwards, can go into this space, can learn this geography, and they've been left maps by the Eastern cultures to show us all these different components of consciousness. And if we let go of all this and work on this, we can start to go deeper into our true being. So here we come now in the early 21st century. The toad has it's just arrived on the scene. Basically, there is not necessarily an indigenous unbroken lineage like with ayahuasca that we presume has been around for at least 1,000 years, and all through the Amazon basin there's tribes which have used ayahuasca in different combinations with different admixture plants. And ayahuasca contains NN-DMT, usually not 5-MeO DMT, although some tribes do have 5-MeO in their brews. But the toad basically burst upon the scene on a bigger scale in about 2012 or so. It has been known of since the 1950s or 60s with science, looking at the Bufo Alvarius specifically. And the synthetic version of 5-MeO has been studied. It has been around since the 60s. In sort of around Arizona, where the Bufo Alvarius toads do live, there has been an underground of the underground that has been aware of the Bufo Alvarius and has been using them. But it never became a cultural thing. It never really became a big thing. And it was really only the Mexican contingent which really reintroduced this to the Seri and to the Sonoran tribes over in Mexico in the Sonoran Desert, where the toad is endemic, that has brought it back to mainstream attention. And it's pattern matched that it's jumped on board the bandwagon of the rise of ayahuasca in the West in the last 2 decades. And also it's jumped on the bandwagon of the psychedelic renaissance, which is blooming at the moment, which really is fast becoming more about the medicalization of psychedelics back into the medical fold, the insurance companies, all the studies being done, and the healing of people and PTSD and chronic conditions with psychedelics. But 5-MeO is like an atom bomb. It's like an atom bomb. And, the Beckley Foundation in the UK just got $18 million to study 5-MeO. But their vision for this is a reductionist therapeutic model, like to help you stop smoking and relieve anxieties. And it's like using an atom bomb, for these really mundane, peripheral things that are important to people. But it's like it's getting in context for what 5-MeO is, what its value is, what we can do with it, and what the goals are. I mean, we have, for the first time, a replicable technology of the sacred which can invoke the divine within to a degree where the majority of people who take it, and everyone's a little bit different of their armoring, their traumas or their sensitivity, but it can reveal this space that essentially the Eastern meditation maps, the Vedanta maps tell us about. We can go there and we can prove it. You can take it and you can experience this for yourself. And for me, this is revolutionary.
Yeah. especially the repeatable process of it, so that people can share similar experiences and map things. That's interesting to describe that as proof. I'm curious, with you talking about the it delving more into the clinical route. Do you see that as sort of a transgression on the experience of what it's supposed to be? Like, do you have sort of qualms with how it's being used medically?
Yeah, so I mean, this comes down to this psychedelic culture discussion, which we're seeing globally at the moment in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, as the FDA has given breakthrough status to MDMA and psilocybin, and
Right.
there's patent grabs, and there's what we're calling corporadelics. There's a whole lot of big money coming in with psychedelics into the medical
That gets
model,
tricky.
into the therapeutic model. You know, at the moment, it's envisaged that it's about $6,000 for, I think, 3 to 5 MDMA sessions with 2 therapists over 8 hours. It's basically SSRIs and antidepressants are basically getting phased out. There was a recent study showing the efficacy of psychedelics as antidepressants in themselves for their qualities versus pharmaceuticals, and it seems like that psychedelics are coming in, but they're coming into a capitalist structure which is reinforcing sort of the 9 to 5 and reinforcing all the biases of a really damaged and decaying and dying culture. I mean, look at the
Yeah.
planet. It's like it's not working. You know, things are needing to change. Where in the 60s, you know, the revolutionary promise of psychedelics was that it altered your consciousness to reveal, I guess, more of this interconnectedness with nature, this feeling that we're all one, with this feeling that we can make this world what we want, you know, if we're in right relationship with it, So it feels like 5-MeO is now coming into the medical model, and I'm not saying it doesn't play a part in that. It's just that it's not its core thing.
Right. And I can feel the concern there.
Yeah, there's been a lot of studies with 5-MeO. Well, not a lot of studies. There's been studies with 5-MeO and a lot of studies with psychedelics in general. 5-MeO is incredibly powerful. And the thing is, there's been study. Johns Hopkins did a study a few years ago on the mystic qualities of a psychedelic experience, and they're basically saying that what their study showed is that the mystical experience itself, and again, even that term may have some aversion or dissonance for people because we're not used to it in the West, right? What I say is, like, 500 years ago, we killed all our witches, our warlocks, our herbalists, our medicine people. When the New World went back to the Old World, and it subjugated all the Mesoamericans, you know, went back to South America, and they killed off, you know, people that basically the churches, because the empire of the time were all religious, right? And so when they saw evidence of magic mushrooms or San Pedro cactus or DMT containing snuffs in the Mesoamerican cultures, they were horrified. And for them, with their bias, it was the work of the devil, and it brought up all this stuff.
Sure. I mean, that's even come to, like, in my background, like, I was raised sort of into no fault of my own, really, just under the sort of guise that anything labeled mysticism was not only evil, but stupid as well. And it's sad that has been so pervasive through the generations of Western culture.
Yeah, I think we live in an age that is very anti-metaphysics, and the exception to that is kind of like Western Christianity, basically, is like the one, but that's fine enough. Like, metaphysics in general is a load of garbage. It's crap. But also, like, a lot of us do believe in God, but, like, we wouldn't call that metaphysics or mysticism because somehow it's not. Let's not look
It's
too
silly.
closely at it.
Yeah, it's
What we're
semantics.
seeing around the world, as the Western psychedelic medicines come back into legitimacy, they're embedded within a capitalist monetary structure, which is really going to mean they're only available in that level to people with the money within the structure. Although there's a parallel movement happening across the world, mainly in North America at the moment, of a decriminalizing nature, and so a lot of on a council type of level, like a localized level. I think Seattle just announced it, or Detroit just announced they will do decriminalizing. So they're making it that
In
it's not
Oregon, too,
an
the whole
offense
state.
for people to have personal usage in a non-commercial way of psychedelic medicines, of entheogenic plants. And so there's this grassroots level on that thing. But if you look around at the moment, you will probably see, and maybe in alternative circles and maybe more in your mainstream feeds, more and more psychedelic information, more and more information about the healing qualities of these substances or their ability to, alleviate PTSD, chronic PTSD, to alleviate your fear of dying, to alleviate anxiety. The thing is, we build up all these energetic charges. So in a more shamanic, even almost like Chinese medicine way of understanding the energy body and the emotional body, and the physical body is just one of our many layers of our being. And so in an indigenous and shamanic understanding, they say that as we go through life, we react to traumas and stresses and triggers and joys as well. But unlike every other creature, all animals in nature, when they're in flight and fear in dangerous situations, you'll see this in nature documentaries, they will shake out. They'll just shake and shake and shake, and they'll release. And you see this in shamanic ceremonies, people shaking uncontrollably, and they're releasing stored up energy and tension and traumas that are in their bodies. Because what happens is, we know psychoactives are reducing or switching off that default mode network. And it's like the channel of reality that we've been trapped in. Unless we have, Western culture gives us alcohol, tobacco, and, maybe more somatic, semi-illegal drugs, but they're all bodily. It's very rare anything helps us let go of the mind, right? And really relax and really open up. And so we build up and accrue and aggregate all these stresses and tensions which manifest as sickness or dis-ease in our physical being. And so these psychoactives, they're having great efficacy and showing great efficacy in the medical model again, because they're relaxing the mind and we can discharge and release. Part of that discharge is about the ego dissolving experience, which is really about this from, as I said, from birth, we're training our children from so early. I am, I want, I this. And it's like, it's a scaffolding. It's a scaffolding on our deeper spiritual nature, but we identify with and believe we are the ego construct. It's a program that's running on the operating system, but it's not the operating system. But we confuse that. We're never taught that, right? And, you can get there through meditation and realizing some of the surface levels of this are, even if you can't stop the thoughts, you cannot identify with the thoughts. Part of you can be witnessing, going, oh, look at that. Oh, there's another one. But there's a part of you back here watching you having the thoughts. Yeah. And so that's the surface level. In the Vedic traditions, they call that the vritti. It's like wind on water. It's like rippling, endless thought. But your mind, it's just the surface of your mind. The mind, which is sort of also the soul, goes very, very deep down.
One of my friends has I attribute this quote to him. I don't know if he started it, but he has a saying that he says, don't believe everything you think, which is very much like this. Like, let these thoughts come in and out of your mind. Don't identify with them all the time, because they're coming in from who knows where at any given moment. Like, just let them pass, grab onto the ones you want to hold on to, invite the ones in for tea that you want to have in for tea, and then let the other ones go away. I like the sort of backing up from it, removing your sense of self from all of these things. For me, I struggle with that, with just my mind constantly going all the time. Like, I feel like it's often my brain and mind is this hamster wheel that's constantly spinning, and it's hard for me to like take a step back and breathe from it all. Like, be in touch, because it's just always running.
And it's stress. I mean, we're basically in a global battery farm of this work culture, which is like, the 21st century isn't this Jetsons flying cars and 2-day work week and everything's automated and utopian and free. I mean, it's really looking like it's looking more like a cloud atlas scenario of like genetically modified herd, in smart cities, cashless society, own nothing, be happy. It's not looking utopian, really. But anyway, the value of these psychedelics is getting a lot of press because they work, but they're being pigeonholed into a Western medical model. And at the core of why they work is this facility of dissolving the ego. And the ego, my friends, is the problem. Not necessarily in itself, but the ego out of check, the ego out of balance, and the planetary ego, the species ego, what humanity is doing as we're now in the 6th great species extinction and all the insects and animals seem to be rapidly dying off. I mean, the water's boiling and no one wants to talk about it, but it's like we're in a planetary emergency and the ego is denying it because the ego's caused it and it's just trying to adapt.
And it's hard when the individual feels powerless to do anything. Like, I picked up trash today, but I'm not solving the world crisis. And it's hard to have that powerless on an individual level while we have the big ego running out of control, as well as our individual egos.
Well, we're getting sort of lateral here, but I mean, part of the problem is that we're not empowered to believe in our power, right? Is that it keeps us malleable and keeps us, slotted into the societal template that they want, which is basically based on the Industrial Revolution and is now being disassembled as we move forward into an informational age. But we are powerful. In the spiritual understanding, we are God on earth. We are the divine made manifest having the human experience. And again, this storytelling thing, the language, I think, has been debased. Is if we say words like God or the divine or source consciousness or the unity field or the omega point or the singularity, I mean, if we said simulation and people have heard Elon Musk saying that, that's probably better for them to understand than these other terms because they've lost cachet. They've lost this ability to connect because no one believes in them anymore because no one's felt them in a very long time.
So how do you...
It's true. These geographies exist.
Yeah, and how do you find a way to empower people to feel that? Like, this is jazzing me up. Like, I think trying to empower people's sense of power and spirituality is great. And how do you do that?
Well, hopefully you do that with love and with patience and with conversations like this. I mean, we're all distracted in the moment. People have like a 2-3 second attention span in their feeds and you've got to grab them. I was working for a psychedelic health and wellness website for the last year or so that's just gone into hiatus for a while. But what we were seeing online is that the algorithms are rigged. The cancel culture is endemic. And that there's a whole power play to censor alternative information, including psychedelic, spiritual, and health and well-being. And it's pretty well succeeding at the moment. So it's hard to get your message out in one level. And then on the second level with the language itself, I mean, I think the best you can do is try to speak from the heart and try to keep it simple or for me to share a personal experience and to give context. So really, I say I'm a storyteller. And I'm a map maker as well, because the stories that I'm telling are about the experiences, and not just my experiences, but of the geographies which exist and of the planetary cultures which share these geographies. And what we're all saying is that there's basically a critical mass of people now who have had the psychedelic or entheogenic or shamanic initiations or awakenings who know, who feel, who understand, oh my God, these spaces exist within us. They're not external to us. And it's tipping the balance of power of what the paradigm really is, what the world really is. And I don't believe that I think the Western mainstream culture is ready for it now. Where in the 60s it was a threat because it was actually an on the ground political threat to the establishment and the powers that be. And we're seeing now this commodification of the psychedelic experience. But as part of that, it's becoming palatable. It's becoming digestible. And, in North America, at least, you could go right now to a ketamine clinic, for instance, and have a deeply powerful psychedelic journey that may help you alleviate your anxiety and PTSD. But remembering that's a byproduct of you finally opening up and letting go, right? And letting go of everything you've been holding on to. And then you'll be having maybe this experience and that has its own value and meaning. And then the periphery healing, potential is what they're marketing. But secretly, we're talking about this intelligence or this awareness or this thing that something bigger than us is in control. I mean, if you're going to get into capitalism and transform capitalism, I mean, this is the way to do it. Clinics on every corner. I mean, once they roll out the 5-MeO clinics, they have no idea what they're getting into. It's like they've got a tiger in the room.
And that's why I feel like this process is so slow, because these experiences and the broad genre of psychedelics, it's such a deep, powerful, life-changing experience that it's hard to just boom, it's part of culture. It's everyone's doing it in the Western world. And it's been such a coveted secret for a long time because they had to stay safe physically. Like they didn't want to get in trouble for doing these things. And these are still controlled substances in the US and in much of the Western world. So it's hard to just jump right into this. But I do think we're progressing in that direction. But I can see how it's a difficult journey to have because it's so powerful and dangerous and special and difficult. Like there's just a lot happening with that.
So I guess getting to your kind of continuing on that and your worry about its being introduced into the medical kind of pharmaceutical community. Is your worry, if I'm summarizing it correctly, that it's going to, like you said, pigeonhole it into being used by a system that is the problem instead of being what gets us away from a system that's a problem?
That summarizes my fears, at least.
Essentially, yes. But what I'm saying, it's like a Trojan horse as well, that it's going to transform more than they realize. And, it's not just about the peak experience. The third thing in the heroic journey is the return. So after you have your big initiation, it's about you coming back into your community, your culture, and then it's like, what the fuck happened to me there? Or who am I? Who am I now? What feels different? What do I do with my energy and my being that goes back into the community and sharing that experience, and then it trickles out and more people want that experience. So there's a Trojan horseness where something bigger is happening. We're all basically getting re-sacralized and re-switched on. But this might be a good opportunity to sort of come back full circle and describe more what the feeling of the 5MEO experience is and leading up to the Bufo Alvarius and the Congress. So, all right, I'll give you a brief rundown. And, it's mytho. There's no way to say this, but this is what I experienced. So the first time I did 5MEO, I was meditating. I had the eye mask on. I had the EEG helmet measuring my brainwaves, which you can see in the film Aya Awakenings on aya-awakenings.com. And basically, it was instantly white light, and it was like this sense of, okay, so there's egoic
I've heard
consciousness.
white light a bunch of times.
Yeah, so egoic consciousness, there's gradations and levels of awareness, and there's an ability of what I call the witness. And so there's no thinking, there's no conscious thinking except reading what's happening and drinking in, and it's like, I was basically going into this white light tunnel, like the classical, mystical, near-death experience that people have. And this is what they say about both, 5MEO in general and maybe NN-DMT, is that they think that it's produced in the body, in the lungs, the cerebrospinal fluid, it's kept at bay. But at near-death experiences or death experiences, they believe it flushes the brain and you have a surge of the DMTs. And it kickstarts basically this process where the soul leaves the body and has this experience going back to where it comes from.
Can I interrupt with a quick question? So when you say they believe that, we've had previous people on talking about near-death experiences and the science of it. And one of our previous guests talked about how his research into near-death experiences was very much discounted by the scientific community. So when you say they, is this universally accepted as true, or is this your understanding of what scientifically is happening and there's debate in the scientific community about it?
I think the scientific community loves to debate and should debate, and it is debating things. A lot of this came from in the early 90s, Rick Strassman did the first legal test with NN-dimethyltryptamine, which is the more visionary substance. And as part of that, it was his hypothesis that these experiences are potentially linked to the near-death experiences. And there has been more science since then. The real issue is even though there's more and more scientific psychedelic studies in the last decade, and this was done back in the 90s, it finished in 95, and he did the book DMT, The Spirit Molecule, and they made a documentary on the same name, which you can check out these claims. There hasn't really been many, if any, human studies. So the problem has been, in the 90s, Strassman did the human studies, and they did intramuscular NN-DMT, and they were mapping it. And they have a very set sort of bandwidth of what they were looking for. And, when people would have these alien encounters and interterrestrials and all this sort of content-driven stuff, it got a bit murky. So it's hard to say. There's currently some legal studies being done in the UK on DMT, and there's been a protocol to develop what they're calling a long-term immersion DMT, where they're titrating with intravenous drips, ongoing DMT. So it's not just something you smoke or you take and it's 15 minutes, but it's hours in the space. So we're starting to get more human tests done. But for the last decade, it's hard to say. I mean, you can't kill someone or invoke a near-death response to check that if they're doing DMT. It's hard to also get live readings of the tryptamines. They metabolize very quickly outside the body. You'd basically have to have a cerebrospinal insert into your spine to get the active readings, and no one's really been up for that.
Invasive.
So it's all entwined, and it's still really being sliced and diced by science to figure out the exactness of these effects.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you with that tangent.
That's a good tangent.
Back to your experience.
So the difference with NN-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT as it builds up is, 5-MeO-DMT is that traditional ego-dissolving white light, and it's a feeling. It's not a visionary thing that's about content. It's really about a feeling. In the Eastern traditions, they have many terms. You may say samadhi, there may be this understanding of a single point of focus. And so as you go in more, my understanding from the shamanic, and there's many ways to slice the geography, but essentially you have a baseline consciousness, like right here, right now. And then as you go in more, you're going into the visionary realm, which you get on NN-DMT, and you go through sort of the fractals and the beings and all that content, all those worlds. But as you go in, which is sort of up the vibratory scale, all paths lead to central source, which is like that white light originating space that many of these spiritual cultures say exists and have maps for, and that can be replicably discovered and awakened within us.
So is that the space that when you first took 5-MeO-DMT, that's the white light that you experienced, was you skipped those levels and just went right to the white space?
Yeah, so 5-MeO-DMT is about 10 times more potent than NN-DMT, and it has that potential to go deep into that vibratory realm very quickly. It comes on pretty much immediately. And so basically I was awash and adrift, disembodied as a consciousness, as a single point of focus in this oceanicness. And the feeling is of this infinite expanse of space. So there's a white light, there was like a tunnel of white light, and there was this vibration and intuitive understanding in that space that it was coming into me and it was opening me up and it was revealing that I was it. And it's this drop and the ocean. So if you think of a drop, an ocean might have billions and billions of individual drops, and it gets a bit quantum-y wave particle thing. It's like it's a wave and it's a particle. It's all in the observer and how you look at it. So in this experience, what I intuitively took from it is this feeling of my individuality, my dropness was opening to reveal the oceanicness, not just in front of me and around me, but within me, that I was it. And all my memories were cascading out and feeding back into the tunnel. And there's this feeling of infinite love, which is a vibration and is a quality that can be experienced. And, in the spectrum of light, white is all. It's like everything in the spectrum. And so it's like everything was there and everything was connected and everything was one. There was this sense of unity, which, in the euphemism for that is non-dual, but really it's unity, it's oneness. And so it's the classical mystical
feelings,
experience.
Right? These were mostly feelings more than visuals?
Yeah, I mean, white light as a visual, but essentially nothing but white light. And when it's just white light and there's nothing but white light, there's no point of reference. There's no differentiation. There's no up, there's no down, there's no back or forwards. There just is this infinite, eternal moment. There's no time. There's no sense of... There was a slight sense of time, or there's a slight sense of movement, but it's not as if I wasn't in an egoic functionality of, it was just pure processing and receiving signal. And so, it's huge because our single point of egoic consciousness now is carrying a lot of information. We're thinking of the conversation we're having. We're carrying some thoughts, past, present, future. We're tracking our body. We're doing multiple things at once. But it's very rare that collapses into a single state of being, which is what all the meditation traditions are aiming at. They're aiming to collapse the wavefront of this consciousness into this deeper reservoir of consciousness. And so, I'm very careful when I talk about psychedelics, entheogen, shamanism. This is not necessarily for everyone, but when we talk about 5-MeO DMT, this is in everyone, right? And you don't need to go seeking the toad. You don't need to go seeking something externally to yourself, but you do need to know that there is this replicable technology. And for me, the toad or synthetic 5-MeO on the outside is just a training wheel. It's a training wheel to reveal these spaces that exist within us that do have an intelligence and an agency and a care and a loving reciprocation for us. It's like there's nothing external to us. This is all internal to us, and it's not the 5-MeO source consciousness in me that is different from you. It's the same space in the one ocean that exists within us. And so these are transformative, and these are mind-blowing in the classical understanding of what that means. And so if the ego can be a witness to this ego dissolvingness, to this reunification of source consciousness within, and if it can remember that and take a taste of that back with it, it changes you. So in the process of opening up and fully letting go, that what maybe ego death, platform orgasm is another equally valid term that doesn't have the loadedness of death in there. What you can understand is you can let go. I mean, letting go all the samskaras and imprints and traumas, maybe not all, but some of them, there's a complicity and a engagement of you and source. Is that even though this is the strongest entheogen we know of for the weight ratio in nature, you are equally as strong. So there can be a lot of glamorization of these substances, and it's hard work, and it's frightening. It can be very terrifying to be in a 5-MeO experience. It's about the quality of your consciousness and what it's ready for. And so don't do this without being ready and talking to people and making sure you have spaciousness in your life for the changes that it may invoke. And the ability to really, I mean, the reason they call it ego death is you're going in and in and in and letting go. And there's nothing but you in that space. So you have to be prepared to break open, or you have to be prepared to open. It can be gentle or it can be hard according to dosage and armoring and sensitivity and the engagement you have with it, your allowance of this process. It's like childbirth. It's a natural process that we all have within us. I believe it's where we come from, it's where we go back to, and it's within us all along. And there's a place and a time for that to awaken within us. And so you are equally strong and you can resist it and it may not happen, or you can give yourself permission to be vulnerable, to trust, to give yourself over to this higher power with its intelligence and with its loving grace.
That's really powerful.
A lot that you were just saying struck parallels with my faith practice that were really, really interesting. Particularly, you talked about a DMT that is more content focused, right? That has visuals and events and goings on, and is more kind of centered in information being received and experienced. And then above that, more of an emotional reception almost, right? A love-oriented reception. And then bringing that down, and you said bringing something back with you into the way that you live it just in the world day to day. And in my faith practice, there's this idea of within everything, there are 3 degrees, and they're called different things: end, cause, effect, love, wisdom, and usefulness, affection, thought, action, different ways of verbalizing it. But there's this deep thing that is love itself, and then clothing that, there is ideas, thoughts, truth, if you will. And then all of that for the purpose of or culminating in
Expressed in
action or event in space and time. And so I just saw that as a very cool parallel. And obviously with the white light you talked about feeling like love, and I've heard other 5-MeO accounts talking about how it just is pure love. A big God or the divine equals love is something I fully
I've got to tell
to.
you, I mean, since being, 5, 6, 7 years in 5-MeO and having experienced it, it's like I have a lot more simpatico with many of the world's religions. I mean, we know there's a whole lot of issues around dogma and what they've done with the institutions of maybe the churches. But, sometimes when I read some of the original texts and the meaning and the love and the commitment behind them, when you've had a felt experience, and the potential of the 5-MeO experience is to reveal the divine within and to feel the love and to let it fill every crevice of your being, to reforge you in the white light, in the heat of dissolving into the infinite, and to come back from that, you're never the same. And so the question is not just who are you, but what do you do with that? And so I find that there must have been a contact experience in a lot of these original traditions. What we've discovered now with modern psychedelic culture is that we're like a songbook ready to be sung. We just have to, turn it on. And these substances are secreted by nature to slot into our wetware to turn us on. And it's only been in the last 60 years or so with the war on drugs, so we haven't been turning on, So it's like, why? And now it's coming back full circle to using these technologies in a safe and sacred manner to remember who and what we really are.
And I do want to stress the safe and sacred part of that, is part of, I think, my concern with some of this stuff becoming more mainstream is that we're in a culture which is increasingly and already so wrapped up in, the instantaneous dopamine hit, the scrolling through things, refreshing all the time, something new hitting our eyes at every moment. And part of my concern with a powerful psychedelic experience becoming more mainstream is that I'm afraid that people won't take it in a safe and sacred way and do it more without thinking and without taking the time to sort of train their minds for what they will experience. So I have a little concern with that.
This could segue us back into talking about WeBack in a moment, because I mean, since the 60s on, there's been this reintroduction of psychedelics, and there was a time in the 80s where the academics coined the term entheogen, from the Greek to invoke the divine within, which is usually applied to more nature-based substances like the ayahuasca and the toad and psilocybin, magic mushrooms, San Pedro. I have a documentary series I've been working on for the last 5 years called shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. And it's looking at the fact that, the indigenous people are the caretakers of these natural substances which change consciousness and invoke the divine within. And they're also been outreaching in the last 2 generations to the West, as Westerners have these experiences, and a certain percentage of those Westerners feel the call to be practitioners or facilitators of these medicines, and they keep percolating and spreading through the West. So 5-MeO DMT, to come back full circle, really has been around for a while, but toad medicine itself, the Bufo Alvarius toad, hasn't been utilized. It's pretty much coming up to a decade of an awareness in the public eye of the Bufo Alvarius toad and of 5-MeO DMT coming out of Mexico. So the Bufo Alvarius toad lives in the north of Mexico over into Arizona, the Sonoran Desert.
Somewhere.
Yeah, it spends 9 months of the year under the ground in darkness, incubating and hibernating, and it comes up in the rainy season. It's probably because of that it metabolizes the bufotenine and about 17 other alkaloids in its paratoid glands in its immune system, and it produces 5-MeO DMT. It's identical to the cane toad here in Australia, but that doesn't have 5-MeO. The cane toad doesn't spend time in darkness, 9 months in darkness. So the toad came out of Mexico on the back of a few very charismatic, dynamic, and potentially dangerous Mexican shamanic individuals trying to turn on as many people as they could, with not as much eye towards safety and going slowly. So it was almost like it was almost like a biblical Old Testament time where a few leading figures, were kickstarting lineages into existence. And the knowledge of the toad spread very rapidly. And, there has been a percolation through psychedelic and shamanic culture in the West, which is still very small, right? It's growing rapidly post-2018 and post the Michael Pollan book, How to Change Your Mind, as, New York Times bestseller, and all the mums and pops of America realize psychedelics can help heal. But Toad jumped on the ayahuasca bandwagon in the sense of a ceremony, a set and setting to be done in, and a medicine that is going to help awaken. And it's had its first flowering, and then basically I first did Toad in around Easter 2015. And then basically everything came Toad in my life. I'd been working with ayahuasca culture.
The first one you took back in 2006 was a synthetic, you said, right?
Yeah, that was synthetic, which you can see in the movie and read about in the book Higher Awakenings. And I hadn't done Toad until 2015.
Okay.
And, people often ask what's the difference between the synthetic and the organic. And chemically, essentially not much in the end once it gets into you. But then there is a feeling of... there's 17 different alkaloids and maybe an entourage effect with the Toad, but it feels more somatic and body and holistic for me. But it does essentially open up into the same space. Toad culture has really started to blossom. And, in the Sonoran Desert with the indigenous tribes there, they are very impoverished. Sometimes there's not running water or electricity. And so there's been a lot of cultural issues of how to support the natives to the Sonoran Desert, who didn't really know about the Toad right under their feet. They didn't know it contained the medicine, but they've been introduced and are now caretakers of that geography and space and medicine. But then there's been a lot of issues around the supply and demand and the teething issues of medicines going out into the world, and essentially of white Westerners serving the medicine. So after I was, initiated with the Toad in 2015, I ended up doing this first documentary in Shamans of the Global Village with Octavio Redig in Mexico, in the Sonoran Desert, looking at the Toad. I also helped form a not-for-profit organization called the Terra Incognita Project, which was looking at what is the neuroscience happening in the brain with 5-MeO-DMT and on ways we could do conservation missions to support the sustainability of the Toad in its environment. And then around 2017, I started to outreach to some of the local Mexicans and was feeling into intuitively, the community, exactly this thing of like I'd been 2 years or so in Toad community, and it was feeling like, well, where are we? Who are we? And, there was a few Toad groups that have been formed on Facebook, online, Toad Forum and support. Rapidly growing into the tens of thousands of people interested in Toad, but we felt like it was time to come together and to celebrate ourselves as a modern culture. And it really felt like to do a conference or a congress, as it became in Mexico City, to bring together the Toadsters of the world felt like a really necessary step. So we did the groundwork for that. And we had the world's first Bufo Alvarius Congress in July 2018. And it has been continuing more or less every year since then.
That's amazing. Now, kind of... Go ahead, Richard.
I think we're about to ask the same question.
Yeah, probably.
When you guys all came together like that, what did you find was your culture? And also, what did you find was there a predominating spiritual background or religious culture that a large portion of the group came out of, or were you kind of patchwork from all different sort of backgrounds and practices?
Yeah, here's the interesting thing. We're talking about storytelling again. So remember, the etymology of the word culture has at its root cult. And so, it's often been said, all you Toadsters are just like a religion, right? Because the thing is, for the majority of people that experience Toad, and again, everyone has a different receptivity and different language for it, but there's obviously a commonality of the experience. We could agree that we went to that same space within ourselves. And there is pretty much a religious fervor, of a reignition or awakening. And this isn't about faith. This isn't about, you know, you go to the Book of Toad and, you know, Octavio 17, Martin Ball chapter 3, there'll be this special phrase. You know, it's not about the dogma. It's about you feeling for yourself whatever you think is happening, right? But we all come together and we've all had that same central mystical experience. And there was a real sense of unity, of oneness, of community, and of belonging, that we had come home and we had found each other, right? Of course, on the external level, there's a lot of politics. As with any community, there's teething issues, there's issues around money and sustainability, empowerment, indigenous cultures, white Westerners. You know, all of that is true and all of that is still being worked out. But at the core of the 5MEO experience, it's like we are all one. It's the same unifying source consciousness and all. And so people that have had that and come together, it's ecstatic to be around the others and to realize there are no others. We're all expressions of that same source. So there's all these proto-scaffolding potentials of toad culture to be a sort of religious impulse there. And there's also these checks and balances where people are cautious about that because of their experiences with established religions. But essentially, I mean, the difference would be if you went and did toad every week with a community of people, it's going to be a religion. And, you know, there might be a place for that. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying for me, what I believe in the long run is that toad is an external catalyst for you to realize you are the medicine, not the toad. The toad doesn't do this. The toad just lowers the mind. So the full potential, when we let go and have an ego-dissolving experience, we understand that we're not in control, that the ego mind is not in control. There is something bigger than us that we're like part of the root structure of, and that we're just one species amongst many, and that there is a process underway in the planet and the whole Gaian mainframe of circulating energy, of growing life forms, of doing something that we are part of. But we've separated from that and we're striving to do what we think is right, but it's killing the planet. So I don't actually know what the ego could do, you know, a healthy ego in right relationship. But the more of us that get there, it'll tell us what to do, because it's not about the individual ego. It's about that greater force. So the idea isn't just to go to the source consciousness. That's where we come from. That's where we go back to. The idea is to format our beings, to put the ego into the back seat enough, to relax enough, to create the conditions within our vibratory beings where that spark of divine consciousness can grow into a flame. And this is essentially what they say in the East that the gurus have done over many decades of meditation or through the grace of God or whatever, is that something activates within them, this same spark, and it grows and it doesn't go away. It's what they call persistent non-dual consciousness, right? It's not just a peak experience you've had with a shaman in the Amazon and then you go back to your 9 to 5. It's something which is already in you, you've activated, and with that nurturing, it can infuse your entire being and shift the way you see the world. That you are connected to that space and it is guiding you, nurturing you, loving you, filling you. And then your relationship with the world changes. And then it's more about a relationship with the greater intelligence that, you know, we have within us to engage with us on this journey of humankind.
There's so much that you've said that has felt like just a different cultural language, talking about my exact way that I see existence, which has been just so fun to listen to. My faith practice is based on Christianity, the Bible, and also the work of this guy, Emanuel Swedenborg. I don't know if you've ever heard that name before.
Heard of him, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So had spiritual experiences, saw into the spiritual realm, had experiences there, wrote about it, and so much of what the kind of essential goal of the practice is to take the ego, which in my theological language to call the proprium, which is just the Latin word meaning yourself, what feels like you, what you attribute to you, taking that and basically destroying it and creating it anew. And it talks about having our ego or our proprium start out as master, but it should see itself as steward, right? As taking care of what's not its, and taking care of what really belongs to God, because our life belongs to the divine, and our ego should see itself as steward of that life, taking care of it, making sure that it's well loved and well cared for, but it isn't ever ours. And it was just really interesting to hear. I don't know. Does that sound?
No, I totally agree. And, for me, we're talking about storytelling. I mean, the danger is all this language, it sounds religious. And, you can read some of these traditions, and I'll be reading them from my experiences of 5-MeO and having revealed the divine and the feeling. And when I read these things, they're identical. It's like I know that they felt it as well. It doesn't matter about the dogma or the language or the culture. It's about the authenticity of your direct connection to that source consciousness, to that God within. If you felt it, and then you almost don't need the words, right? But here we are reducing it to words and trying to communicate, and that's where the difficulties, engender.
Yeah. And I love that. And you've talked about it in the lens of the hero's journey, that returning back, I think is such an important part of the process. Because I think a lot of people see what is often called mysticism, and we've already talked about the possible negative connotation of that language in the Western world, as sort of a removal from the world and separating and not being part of it. And I mean, we see that in a lot of monastic traditions, Eastern monastic traditions, Christian monastic traditions, this removal from, and that's been something that's always been really challenging for me. I don't see that as my path, right? I want to become a better me, and then let that best creation of myself flow into the world and make the world better.
Yeah, get more involved, be more.
Here's what it brings up for me. It's almost as if religion, as a concept, not just how it's taken by people, but the concept of what a religion is, hasn't adapted to the informational age or the psychedelic age or the modern age, right? So what we have with 5-MeO and with Toad, essentially, we have a replicable technology of the sacred. That if you take this, it doesn't care what your dogma is, what your lens is, what your religion is. You can be a-religious, no religion at all. You can be Muslim, you can be Catholic, you can be Buddhist, you can be whatever. And the thing is, if you do have a religious patterning, it will probably support that, because you are going to be. It's translinguistic. It's an experience beyond words. It's the originating space which all words come from. Pretty much, maybe you could even extend to say all civilizations are like the scaffolding we create to anchor the divine experience, because we got to make sense of it and we communicate it, and because of that communication, then societies form, and it's from that centralization of the experience that civilizations form, and then they become dogmatic, and then they lose the originating catalyst, and they go to words and priestcraft and dogma, and then they get a bad rap, but then it comes full circle. But here's the thing, I mean, there's an increasing amount of Buddhists and of people from a more Eastern traditions who work with their consciousness already, who do meditate, who are experiencing 5-MeO. It's becoming very prevalent. There's a little bit of a dogma around the left-hand path and intoxicants in some of these traditions, but that's just political. Because if you go back to the originating texts, as I described, the Soma,
Right.
and they had substances, and it's not about that it's cheating or a left-hand path. It's that it's just very, very powerful. And the value really I see is to have a practice, whether you say that's prayer or meditation or breath work or tantra and the psychedelic. So you're activating the energetic and the neurology and everything from a modern point of view. You're understanding what you're activating, and then you're having the experience, but you have the support network and the ideological anchoring of a practice to continue that relationship before, during, and after. And so really, this is the spiritual awakening that the entheogens can reveal. The religion can be the practice of the spirituality, but to marry the two together is the most powerful. And for me, the future of the psychedelic entheogenic movement is to put it into practice and to realize that, eventually, especially with 5-MeO, you do not need the external catalyst. That is there to awaken, to initiate, to show you the potential. But then with the practice, when it's shown you all the parts of yourself, there are other tools to awaken it, and it can get easier and easier. So it's interesting territory we're in.
Yeah, it's funny because part of my ego and where I come from, I'm a very I want there to be some sort of you need to have training before doing this. You need to earn it, deserve it. I have a lot of that in the back of my brain. You need to work for things. That's a lot of my sort of ego background speaking there. So part of this is almost scary to me that someone can have this fast track access to this divine enlightenment, that there's a part of me that is pushing back and feeling like this might be undeserved for those people versus the ones doing the breath work, doing the meditation, training themselves to get to a point where they're ready for this. So that's some of my, baggage. And also, my question would be, is there any downside to being sort of unprepared for this kind of experience? That light always being on is something that scares me. What if you open a door that you didn't mean or know was going to be open forever? And are there unintended negative consequences with that?
So number one, I'd ask you, Luke, is do you love yourself? Really? I mean, and the thing is, when people have asked me that, I think, I think I do. I think I do. But what does that really mean? And I deflect it. My mind deflects it, right? And I think I care for myself. Yeah, I think I love myself. But there's a really deep quality of self-respect and self-worth. And so the thing is, again, 5-MeO DMT is the sacred of the sacred, right? And it exists within you already, right? And it's not even the 5-MeO DMT. 5-MeO DMT is the name we're giving to a chemical that is in our consciousness, is in our bodies, which science believes could trigger that spiritual near-death experience, the white light, and that meeting with the infinite within. But the thing is, do you feel you're worthy for that? Do we have to work at that? In times past, maybe we've had to do 20 years of meditation, whatever. But there's some type of Protestant work ethic, capitalist culture thing which says you can't get it for free. You don't deserve it yet. But what we're talking about, and again, language and different lenses for this, imagine how can God, how can you put a number on God here? It's like unconditional love is your birthright. It's your true nature. We are born from love, right? We are born from this ecstatic impulse. And it's you deserve this, and it's already within you. And so there's some type of ego separation scaffolding, which is saying, I'm not worthy. It can't be that easy. Surely, no. What's the catch? And it's oh my God, we're so armored. We're so calcified. We're so forgotten that we no longer see the miracle of life. We no longer believe in the magic. We no longer believe we're worthy, even if we think we love ourselves. But we think it can't be that simple. It is.
And I definitely have a complicated relationship with that self-love because there's so many conflicting parts of me that I don't want to be vain or delve into vanity, and I want to stay humble, but I also want to use my skills to the best of their abilities and work on myself and love myself so that I can love other people. And it's hard to, I think, fully love myself when I'm trying to not be self-righteous or vain at the same time. So I struggle finding a good balance there.
I just came up with a slogan in my head. It's there's no you in God, but God's in you. Right? Yeah. I mean, the letter U, right?
Yeah,
It's we've forgotten. It's been so long and so many generations of human history and the pain and warfare and separate. I mean, look at the planet. Why aren't we feeding everyone? Why aren't we housing everyone? It's not. Don't use the word socialism. We're one humanity, and we could make this a whole lot better world except for our egos. And so this idea of self-love is when you've had this unitive experience, when you realize that everyone you walk down the street and see is also God, they're all extensions of you. It's there's no you in God. You have to let go of the you to reveal the God, right? And then you realize God's in all of you, right?
That's
but it's like
beautiful.
you have to have that initiation,
Mm.
right, to really embody it, to believe it, to know it. So it's not thinking it. It's not, Rack's saying some really interesting things. Wouldn't that be nice? It can't be. I mean, it's a completely felt, lived experience, right? It's not even like the visionary thing. It's the feeling of this emanating source consciousness that is alive and well, that all these religious, indigenous traditions say is there, and now we can prove is there.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that brought to mind for me one of my favorite quotes from my worldview from Swedenborg's work that says religion, and it's kind of redefining religion, right? Trying to give a new context for the word. Religion is life, or all of religion relates to life. And the life of that religion is doing good. And I love how simplistic it makes it. And it gets back to what you were saying about like, it's not dogma. It's not my language versus your language. It's not my minutia of belief versus your minutia of belief. It's life. And in that and the essence of that life is doing good. It's just religion in its essence is the living of goodness. And we surround it with so much garbage and so much disagreement. And I see in my mind, the biggest problem that organized religion has had historically and today is that instead of making religion this format that encourages people to live goodness, it becomes an extension of your ego or yourself. Right now, I get to be not just in this body, I get to be this whole group of people. I'm an even more powerful ego, which is like the inverted, upside down idea of community. Not I'm part of something bigger, but something bigger is me. And it really gets horrific.
And
really
I think
fast.
that weaponizes its own goodness, where this religion's goodness is better than other. It's the us versus them mentality, and turns into sort of like an assault weapon of goodness against other people's definitions of that, or how they think or see things are right. And then it gets very twisted and just totally loses its integrity as goodness itself.
You know, what I'd like to suggest is that there's like a Copernicus moment, right? It's when you realize that the Earth is revolving around the sun, right?
Yeah.
And in the sense of, in our ego constructs, we think we're separate, we think we're individual, and, you know, the Earth revolves around the individual, revolves around the I. But if you see the I as like, it's like an iceberg with 9/10 under the water, so the ego construct's above the water, 9/10 of this root structure going into dimensional realms and back into source consciousness. But once you go down this path of awakening, what happens is you're never really the same, and it changes your perspective of the world, like a Copernicus moment, that I realize it's like I'm revolving around source, and source is the originating thing having the rack experience. And how you play the game is the game, my friends.
Our religion also, or you know, Swedenborgianism has a concept of the grand human, which is that, you know, the divine is in this sort of visual shape of a human, and we are all part of it, and we are all it, sort of. But we all play a specific part. Like, we are all the same, but we have unique skill sets and things that we can do to help the goodness in myself and the goodness in each other. And so we are all, like, someone could be part of the finger versus part of the liver. Like, these have different functions in this grand human drawing sort of divinity and humankind. And it's sort of similar to this, like, recognizing that we are all the same, but we have different ways of connecting to each other and ways of making each other feel loved that we have special uses for. Like, we are not devoid of individuality in that we are all robots. We are full of emotion, full of character, full of life and expression, not devoid of it. And though we are similar from the same divinity, from God, we have our own uniqueness from that as well.
Yeah,
which
I mean, it's a gestalt. It's a species gestalt, that we're all individual enough, and we have different gifts and, you know, things within us but collectively they're part of a whole. And so how can we be in service to the whole? How can we mobilize, utilizing our resources and our innate gifts to be in service? Because then once you remember that what's in there and the extension on the outside, it's like, for me, it's like the path that unfolds is one of service and of being the best me, but in sharing that and helping invoke and awaken. We don't awaken people awaken themselves, but it's a time of awakening now. And it's like, what are our gifts and what are our best qualities we can bring forward? Because it's like, this is the time, and this generation in the years ahead, it's like it's coming to a fruition point. So don't be scared of that. The ego is always trying to protect and navigate and do the best to remove us from harm's way. But it's really like the camel through the eye of the needle here. Is like there's a crunch point coming up really imminently in the planet and human history where we have to get better. Eckhart Tolle said, evolve or die. And it's like it's coming to that point.
Yeah. Yeah, my lifetime is going to see some wild shifts that I want to be prepared for.
Yeah, I love what you were saying about the kind of fear of change of the proprium. I sense that so viscerally in myself and in the culture that I'm steeped in. It's like the whole world is either a fear of change and the possible threats that could come with it, or a kickback against that fear. And again, just this polarization instead of a coming together. And
you know what happens in a classical psychedelic experience, as we described, there's a journey that happens, and it's a journey of letting go. It's a journey of letting go of the mind, of the ego, of everything that we're holding on to. And so it is often called that ego death. And what it means is you can't hold on. In the power of the big experiences, it's about complete surrender of everything. So in some sense, it's like dying, right? And the thing is, the mind's always protecting because it fears dying because it doesn't know what's on the other side. Is it nothing? Am I going to die? Whatever. But if you have these transcendental mystical experiences on different substances or just endogenously, you get to the other side and you realize that, dying or death, it's basically a verb. It's not about what's on the other side. That's a geography and a dimension. It's about the terror of holding on, of letting go of the known, right? So it's a trust thing. We have to trust that there's something versus nothing. I mean, why are we here in something versus nothing? We don't know the whole shebang, right? The whole thing's a card game that we're really oblivious to. But in that letting go on a psychedelic journey, it's almost the same on a species journey. So what we're coming up to now is the collective global dark night of the soul, right? And that's the time when we're put to the test, and the ego is put to the test of all the horrors and all the dangers and all the insecurities and fears. And there's almost like a process pushing us forward to this point that we are trying to back away from because we are scared and we can feel there's a danger of death. This is the ultimate fear of what fuels most of life, is the fear of death, right? Because we don't know what's on the other side. If you don't fear death, if you've had a mystical, entheogenic revelation where you are all one, most people, and this is even in the scientific studies with psychedelics, it alleviates your fear of death. Time and time again, the studies have shown it alleviates for cancer patients, for people they've been able to test on. The ego-dissolving mystical experience alleviates their fear of death because they get a peek on what's on the other side, and it feels good, and it's full of love, and it is us, and there's nothing to worry about, right? But what we're going through now is this planetary dark night of the soul, and it is a death. It's a planetary death of the old consciousness and of the old forms that we've created from that consciousness in our culture, in the way we interact with the world and the planet and the resource and the empire and all that stuff that's not worked. And so, there's the ego death, but what we've got to understand is it's not linear in the sense of boom, peak, death, that's it, it's finished. It's a feedback loop. And it's a network. And so there's a rebirth. There's always a rebirth. Life always rebirths
Yeah.
itself, here or somewhere else or whatever. But the point is there's a transformation and a rebirth, and we have to trust the process. Like the famous, is it Goethe or Anais Nin, they say, ours is not to question love or seek love. Ours is just to remove the barriers or obstacles between us and love. So the thing we seek is already within us. The process that we are meant to be in is already happening on the planet. And like it or not, you can resist it with your ego, or you can work on your ego. You can do it with therapy. You can do it with a partner in a relationship. You can do it with psychedelics. However you do it, meditation, all these paths will lead to this central source in this time of awakening. The world wants you to awaken. This is the time, right? And we have to trust that process and work towards that process. And that's what I believe sacraments and entheogens like 5-MeO and the toad are assisting us to do.
Yeah, it helps us be brave and courageous in preparing for the unknown and accepting the unknown and, in a way, looking forward to it.
I was gonna ask a question, but you kind of answered it right at the end there. I was going to ask. It seems like a lot of this process that you're describing is kind of inevitably going to happen, right? It's happening to us, and
it's happening for us, not to us. It's a big, important distinction.
Our ego says to, I guess.
Our ego says, good distinction.
But think of the baby in the womb. It's like, oh my God, the walls are closing in. The nutrients have stopped. It's like the water's broken. Oh my God, shit's happening. I'm going to die. And then it's like, poof. Oh my God, there's more. There's something on the other side.
Yeah.
So my question is, right, like a baby doesn't have active steps that it takes in that process, really.
Yeah, it's just
like
forced into it.
Again, that process is guided through that process, and it's fairly passive until after the birth. So what's our role leading up to a rebirth? Are we just supposed to be passive?
Yeah,
and just
how much is
wait
like
for our
inward
egos?
preparation with the entheogens like we've been talking about versus what can we do collectively?
Well, ultimately, you do everything you can. But the thing is, many decades ago, I was more in the activist scene as well. And, activists burn out frequently because they do everything they can to the point of exhaustion and not much return. But you feel like you have to.
Yeah.
But from a spiritual understanding, we understand that everything on the outside is a reflection on the inside. So, if you're looking in the mirror and, you're trying to comb the reflection's hair, it's not going to happen. But if internally you're doing your work on the inside, it's going to have an effect on the outside because you shift and what you align to. What we're really seeing now is how do we scale that awakening up? Where's the scalability of the awakening? But even in that phrase, there's a mechanistic ego control of trying to be in control of the awakening, right?
Yeah.
And so, to one of your points I didn't answer before is no, 5-MeO is not for everyone, and neither are psychedelics. The difference, as I said, with 5-MeO is it's already in everyone, and it can be activated endogenously, both through breath, through trauma, through near-death experiences, through magnetic field shifts, through natural planetary changes, which I believe is 50-50 on the cards imminently. So, what can we do? I mean, number one, work on yourself, because saving the world is beyond even Elon Musk, right? Any one individual. Yes, if individually we all came together, we could maybe save the world. But secretly, what I believe is the world doesn't want to be saved. The world is saving itself through us, right? It's like there's a process underway. It's like we're in the womb and the fetuses are going, fuck, all right, put a Band-Aid over there, put your foot on the hole. It's like, let's block it up. We can fix this. We can fix this, right? But the point is, unless we understand what we're in and what the process is, we don't know what we're fixing. It's like geoengineering. They've got all these plans to stop global warming, all of which actually I've looked into, and none of the geoengineering projects will scale in time for the emergency. But they'll fuck up. If you reflect sunlight, boom, there go the plants. Or if you put iron in the oceans and to absorb things, boom. It's an interconnected world. Right. It's like you have to know what the process is. And the way to know what the process is to have a deep spiritual experience yourself, to connect to the intelligence behind the process and to allow that intelligence behind the process to guide you, to be you, to love you, and to change you. So then you put that into action in the world.
Wow.
Well said.
Dang. Well, thank you so much, man. Richard, do you want to have any like last rapid fire questions? I know we've been talking for a while now, so I want to respect your time.
Yeah, we're here past the 2-hour mark, and that's always
always a good sign.
Always a good sign.
I have a quick question.
Go for it.
You've talked a lot about the toad, as in, 5-MeO-DMT is already in us to some extent. So is that sort of for you the draw to that experience specifically because it's something that's already naturally occurring in us as compared to another psychedelic experience from something like acid or mushrooms or ketamine or whatever? Also, I want to apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm a little raspy.
I mean, 5-MeO is the I'm trying to be careful here. I don't want to proselytize or promote in a sense, and remembering it's already within us. But it's been described that like on the tree of life, or like a Christmas tree with all the baubles, it's like all the entheogens are on this tree coming from the earth, right? You've got your psilocybin and your San Pedros and all the different things. And the star at the top of the tree is the light, and 5-MeO is the light. So I know that's sort of like a hierarchy, and it's not as easy as that. It's a network when it's the planet, and they all have a purpose. And all the different entheogens have a purpose. It's like in a doctor's a surgery room. It's like you'll go nurse, like sponge, suction, suture, scissors. So 5-MeO is very good at one thing: flatlining that mind or reducing the mind, the egoic mind, to reveal source consciousness beneath everything, right? And to feel that thing. It can be helpful to relieve some traumas, but people with a lot of armoring and traumatic density in their systems, MDMA is probably better. A guided therapy session with an MDMA therapist. Psilocybin has its benefits. They all have specific, usages and things which they're good at. In general, I think I feel like I've become monogamous with 5-MeO because it's just the premier tool. And I feel like I'm in service to that and with that. And so, when I had been in Mexico working as a facilitator with the medicine around WeBack and conferences like that, it is my preferred entheogen. I also traditionally still lead ayahuasca retreats down to Peru once a year in June to work with that medicine. And it's grounding. But usually 5-MeO is my preferred entheogen of choice. And yeah, it's really about moving forward with that to embody and to take up more of these meditation, breathwork practices, so we don't need the external catalyst, So
Right.
I'm still on that journey of fruition and becoming the best me as well.
Richard, I have one final follow-up, unless you have anything.
No, go for it.
We've talked a lot about your spirituality post ayahuasca, post doing your professional work. What were you like growing up? What kind of faith background did you come from?
Well, technically a Roman Catholic, but I'd say that I think I had a map of Krypton, and sort of like, Superman was up there with Jesus for me. It was never dogmatic that I believed one over the other. Really, they were all stories. There's this little known thing that, there's a target window in neural development where you can start reading at like between 2 and 2.5, or then usually four up, and it skips a beat. I got the 2.5. I was like 2 months prem, interesting birth story type stuff. But basically, I think I was always up in my head. Forceps birth pulled me out. I've got this photo of me with an almond-shaped baby head. But basically, whatever my development, I've always been wordy, right? And reading from comics and reading from stuff. So all the pattern matching mythologies, for me, superheroes were my religion, really.
Interesting.
But, you've got this breadth of experience of multidimensionality, of time travel, of, beings, and also of goodness, of correct relationship, and of being the best you can be. So, I went to a Catholic school, but there's stuff there, but it was just another ism amongst many, I guess. And then over time, I've explored Eastern mysticism and a lot of their maps as well. And I've never been really dogmatically attached to any one, I think, which has been a saving grace for me.
Nice. And I guess my final question would be: so after this life, what do you think happens? Do you return to the pool of the ocean? Does your drop synthesize?
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened to me. That's what happened to me on that first complete ego dissolving experience. It wasn't complete ego dissolving because there was just a 1/100th of a witnessing consciousness traveling through this infinite white light tunnel. And what I really felt and it's in the book. I really recommend my book, Ire Awakenings, or the film as well, but the book has whole chapters of words thrown at this. And I do have a loquacious ability to feel. So when I'm not thinking, right? It's the heart-mind unification thing where you're getting a raw download of the exact sculpted word, which is meant to trigger the feeling. It's all about this communicative, this spell. Language is a virus, and it's a spell, right? We put on this vibratory telepathy that we're doing. So in that experience, I really felt that cyclic nature of the drop going back to the ocean and the ocean coming back to the drop, and that I went all the way up, all the way in, and I could see how it was reading me, and then I come back down, but that's awakened within me, and I'm like, it's the eternal return. So I think it's infinite, and I get pretty deeply cosmological, or I've really tried to think this through. I'm currently redoing my website with a web team in Europe, and there's like 20 years of back content, and we're developing a mystery school sort of level where all my lectures and talks like these are transcribed and are sort of like hyperlinked, and trying to bring a more cohesive mapping to this experience where we can say, oh yeah, that's the bit where, I don't know, the deep source, and here's the bit where you reach the golden liquid language download. And, there's this consensual geography of inner dimensionality. But essentially, I believe, yeah, we're immortal beings. I mean, we're here having a physical experience. We don't know what it is. Science still does not know what consciousness is. The two main trains of thought are our brains generate consciousness, and equally, 50% of scientists still believe to this day, more or less, that the brain is a receiving aperture or conduit of consciousness. The consciousness is something which is in everything, is broadcast, and we are receiving the signal. I'll tell you one little last story to finish. So this isn't actually my story. It's a dearly departed friend called Dan Schreiber, who died a few years ago. He worked with the Sequoia tribe in Ecuador, who work with yahe, which is their name for ayahuasca. But in the brew, they have the Banisteriopsis carpi vine with the harmine and harmaline, and they work with chalaponga, which has 5-MeO-DMT in it instead of NN-DMT from the chacruna. And they say that they were given the instructions or the knowledge of how to make this brew from the star people, or the people who live in the light, right? And so they prepare the yahe for 2 weeks. They sing to it vibrationally to purify it, so it's so pure. They drink off the ground in hammocks so they're not touching the ground. And when they go into that experience, it's like a liquid 5-MeO source consciousness experience. On my first 5-MeO toad experience with Octavio Redig, it's very unusual because it's not usually content, but I had a whiteout, which is not uncommon. And in that whiteout, my consciousness was not conscious. And then all of a sudden there was this singing, and I was being sung back into existence inside Deep Source in the white light. And I was like reformatted by the song. And there were these 4 curanderos, like Mesoamerican shamans made of light in the white light. So it's like white silhouettes on white. I'm obviously not just seeing it. It's an intuitive telepathic receiving the signal, right? And they were not just singing me back, they were singing me the song. And the song was like, oh my God, it was everything. It was like shine. Like it was like this concentration of consciousness in the light, shining like the light. And that was my true nature. And
Wow.
what I took from that coming back is that it is possible to live in the light, that this geography that we describe of the interdimensionality, going from baseline vibration into the geometries and the NN-DMT and the astral realm and the contents, past, present, future, ancestors, interdimensionality, aliens, keep going into the lower echelons of the white light source. And then, in those middle pockets of deep source consciousness, when the witnessing consciousness can exist, and there's a quote in the Bible where they say you cannot look upon the naked face of God and survive. I know what they mean. Is the deeper you go in, the less of you can remain. And in the true depth of it, there is no you. There can only be God, right? But in the event horizon, there is an event horizon around Deep Source where I believe these ancestors, shamans were made of light. And the sequoia, who say that the star people come from the light, live in. And I thought, well, I don't know the answers to this, but what I feel like is that the whole biological enterprise is a training ground to learn that we're souls, to learn that we're God on earth, the Henry Bergson thing, to the universe is a machine for making gods. And that this practice of the entheogens is to go into these spaces like the iceberg, like dark matter. 97% of the universe is unseen, interdimensional density unseen in the physical universe, right? And that's where the ancestors are. That's where the other human civilizations, which have won the game, have figured out what we're here for, is to learn how to transcend. Is if the earth is a womb, right, we're meant to leave the womb. We're not meant to stay here and fix it. It's meant to produce the next wave, right? There'll be more species after us, hopefully, unless it goes runaway Venus effect, but hopefully the earth will have more species, right? As long as the earth doesn't die. But our point in human history is to ride the crest of this wave technologically and to become something more. So the Great Reset crowd are trying to do a transhumanist approach to that, which is an externalization of the ego and the control and protecting them from death, which is protecting them from God on the other side of the veil. And the spiritual approach is to harness and finesse and to own the awakening empowerment and knowledge of your divine nature so you can transcend crossover. And there are these potentials, which I have witnessed and felt, to live in the light, to live in the lower echelons of deep source consciousness. And it feels like that's the point for me, is that it may be not, it's like there's this interdimensionality isn't just a bungee jump that we're going into and coming back from, is that this whole world is the birth chamber for that spiritual nature, and that the whole game continues on the inside, on inner dimensionality, and that all these indigenous cultures say this. There are whole races of beings, right? And that, we can learn to inhabit these spaces as well. And so, I don't know, it's a story, and I'm a storyteller. Join me.
Oh, man, I feel like I haven't blinked in 2 hours. I'm soaking it all in.
Awesome. Well, this has been an amazing 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
It's been such a joy to have you on the show. We've been on hiatus for a bit, and this is our first episode back, actually. And what a one back. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
this
thank
has been
you
a
so
blast.
much. You're a
been a
brilliant
pleasure.
man, and I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad we had you on. Yeah. Would you like to, you've mentioned your book and your docu-series. Feel free to list out what you'd like people to go to learn more about you and what you've done. And we can put links up in
things are still on the web a little bit in transition. Rakrazam.com will hopefully be relaunched by January. It's been a really long process to harness all of these type of interviews and transcriptions and like 15, 20 years of content. So it's coming. Rakrazam.com. Shamans of the Global Village, .com is where you can see 2 documentary episodes, one with the Bufo Alvarius toad and one with peyote. With entheogens, there's another film and book called Aya Awakenings. You can find that at aya-awakenings.com, or the book is on amazon.com as well. There's 2 books there. I really recommend the book. Or if you can, check out Aya Awakenings, the book, because this languaging that I have in the book, it's poetry. It's like God's poetry. It's this, and it's capturing the experiences in words in this alchemical storytelling way. So they're my main sites. You can also check out Inner Perfect World, which was a podcast I used to do on Podomatic. And it's a bit fragmented all over the place. You'll have to go looking a bit, but by January, the website will be up, bringing it all together in a central spot.
Wow. Well, no shortage of material for you. Congratulations on the wealth of work. That's amazing. All right, Rak. Well, thank you so much for being on our podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah.
And
many
you
blessings
are-
on your path.
Yeah, and you are eternally in our future, so I hope that your wisdom can always flow down to us in the past here, being in Australia.
Let's do this again sometime.
All right, yeah, we'll have you back
I'd love
sometime.
to.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
See ya.
Aloha.
See you.